When the weakest area is language comprehension, we need to look again at what are those language skills inherent in language comprehension in order to make sense from written text. So think for a minute about the kind of things you're doing now in that area. What are the activities you do to build vocabulary with your students, to build that background knowledge? And what are the things, where are your questions about how to provide the best instruction for students who have that weakness in the area of language comprehension? Language comprehension is critical to the ability to read silently with comprehension because it is the language that brings meaning to print. When language comprehension is the area of relative weakness, according to the whole-to-part assessment, there can be two areas involved. One is knowledge of text structures and then knowledge of the world. Knowledge of text structures includes sentence structure, paragraph structure, story structure, expository structure, and making inferences. Knowledge of the world includes those things like vocabulary and non-linguistic knowledge from real experiences. Let's look first at background, or this knowledge of the world. And another common word for that is background knowledge. Background knowledge is integral to knowledge of the world and is built upon understanding the vocabulary about a topic, how those words relate to each other, which is semantics, and in general how words are put together in sentences, the syntax, to create unique meaning. Research in this area points to one compelling fact, that what students already know about content is one of the strongest indicators of how well they will learn new information relative to the content. This is from research of Marzano in 2004. And this gives us a compelling reason why we need to help our students accent that background knowledge in those content areas, because without some of those beginning levels of knowledge and skills in those areas, they don't have anything to tie on to that. So that really is important for us to also be thinking about the background knowledge that we need to be building for them to be successful in their content areas. Knowledge of the world is an issue for many students, and especially students such as our English language learners, children of poverty, and students with sensory impairments. To select an appropriate intervention for this area of weakness, it's important to know where a student's language comprehension breaks down. The specific weakness can be at the single word level, it can be at the sentence level, the discourse level, and/or level of just not having world experiences. It's helpful to pinpoint that area of language comprehension weakness, and this is an area where your speech-language pathologist is so important in helping identify those students with language impairments and what are the areas where they most need to work. Knowledge of text structures helps students read with comprehension and write meaningfully. Spoken language and written language draw on similar component skills, but a lot of additional knowledge is required to understand the meaning of written text as compared to oral language. The sentence structure of written language is often more formal and complex than people use in spoken language. Also, written language is removed from the present context and doesn't offer those non-linguistic cues that the face-to-face interaction does. Also, making inferences is often necessary when reading, much more than when listening to people talk. And so you need to make inferences to understand what is going to happen next or what is going on between the lines, because the author is not available for us to ask questions for clarification. So this requires the reader to kind of read between the lines to understand what is important to know, but is not written. To identify which area of knowledge of text structures is weak, it's helpful to determine the student's ability to understand the meaning of sentences with increasing language complexity. This includes an ability to transform questions to statements, and again, statements into questions. An ability to understand and produce sentences of greater complexity is also needed. A comparison of the student's ability to understand nonfiction versus fiction can also give important information about the student's exact area of weakness, specifically in how these different genres are structured and how meaning is encoded in these different genres. Intervening for students who have difficulty with that knowledge of the world can be provided both indirectly and directly. Both are important in the development of a rich and mature understanding of words and academic achievement. Indirect instruction is encouraged through conversation, hearing others read aloud, oral language practice, and discussion. In grades K through 3, the Center for the Improvement of Early Reading Achievement actually counts indirect instruction of vocabulary as the most effective means of supporting vocabulary growth. So again, this gives us another reason to make sure our students have access to that richer vocabulary that they may be getting from grade level peers and from communicating with each other. There's a very strong relationship between vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge. So we want to talk a bit about vocabulary development. Effective interventions help students link new information to previous experience and become a permanent memory, which can then become part of background knowledge. These activities help students process the information several times and add meaningful detail and associations to shape the meaning. This new, richer understanding needs to connect with what we already know to become part of our background knowledge. So just like today, as you're listening to new information, you're hooking it on to things you already know, and you're comparing and contrasting, and that way it helps you remember what you have learned or what you have heard today versus what you knew previously. Activating a student's existing background knowledge is important to any instruction in language comprehension. Important to have them tie anything new being presented to some concepts they already know, something already in their culture, something already learned previously in the year, etc. Karen Erickson recognizes the importance of meaningful vocabulary instruction to building background knowledge, and she states, when building background knowledge and teaching vocabulary, it's important that we always link the new to the known. It makes good sense. New to known. That's how we all catalog new information in a way that we can retrieve it at a new time. We're constantly comparing the new information we gather to what we already know, finding the ways that it's the same and different from what we already know. Intervening in the area of vocabulary development. Isabel Beck has noted the importance of looking at the frequency of words used in the English language when trying to provide direct vocabulary instruction. We often want to focus our efforts on those words that have the most frequency or most apt to be encountered in a student's language opportunities. And from her research, she has developed what she calls tiers of words to consider when directly teaching vocabulary. So for example, she calls Tier 1 words those basic concepts such as you find in the BAME. These are concepts such as up, down, over, under, first, last. The next level she describes what she calls Tier 2 words, and these are those vocabulary words that cross across curricular areas. So for example would be the term equal. It's a term that we use in math as we're looking at equations. It's also a term we might hear in social studies in terms of equality, and you might hear it in science in terms of equal weights, equal compositions, etc. So again, those would be important words to teach for our students who we want to have access to that grade level curriculum, or who are actually in those grade level classes and need to have that content knowledge and that vocabulary to work with it. The third tier are words she calls very vocabulary specific for specific curricular areas. So those would be words specifically in one content area that may not be repeated in another. So teaching vocabulary from word lists is also considered ineffective. Those word lists do not provide that, the pictures, the experience, that connected text and discourse would. So again, that is not a very effective way to teach vocabulary words to students. vocabulary instruction really needs to occur within that context of how the word is encountered. So some more suggestions for teaching vocabulary have been recommended by the National Reading Panel, and we talked before, I think, in the first webinar about all the different studies they looked at in terms of teaching reading. And so as they looked at all these thousands of reading research papers, they came up with 8 research-based principles for teaching vocabulary. So again, they recommend that direct instruction of vocabulary is required. So we can't just assume students are going to pick it up from language that they hear or what they read. We actually directly instruct them in vocabulary to help support them. Another recommendation from that reading panel is that we look at repetition and multiple exposure to vocabulary. So this fits a lot what we said about word ID, remember, that we need to have a lot of opportunities to interact with the same word, in the same ways in language, lots of opportunities to interact with words. So as vocabulary words are introduced, it's really helpful for teachers to encourage and model using those new words in other times of the day, or to point out when that word is coming up again in a different book or a different topic. Another recommendation is that we learn with rich context. So again, the vocabulary words we're working with kids should be useful in many contexts. So they will have opportunities to use those again and hear them again. They also have some more recommendations. The fourth one they list is students need to understand vocabulary in the context of reading and not focus only on words to be learned. So again, to give students a list of words to be learned is not going to be nearly as effective as having those words embedded in that text. Another suggestion is that vocabulary learning is effective when it involves engagement. And again, the research on engagement is very rich. Lots of studies have shown that when students are actually engaged in learning, you see so much more achievement. So again, find ways that that's engaging for your students. Those words should be words that, again, you tie to their own personal experiences, their family, their culture, the foods they eat, where they live, etc., so that it has meaning to them. Also, computer technology can be used to effectively teach vocabulary. Vocabulary can be learned a lot through incidental learning. We talked about that way of just indirectly picking up vocabulary. So provide those kind of accidental, incidental types of learning when you can. And then remember that a single vocabulary instruction method will not result in optimal learning. You're not going to find one box or book that teaches you how to teach vocabulary. You need to embed it and make it a rich part of every day with your students. When we're trying to intervene in that area of knowledge of the world, again, that effective vocabulary is so important. And so here's some other things. Marzano, who's done a lot of work in this area of building background knowledge, talks about some specific things he recommends in terms of interventions for building vocabulary. And so he suggests making sure there's descriptions as well as just definitions of words. Practice using the word, giving examples how it might be used would add to that instruction. Another suggestion is something he found in his research is use of linguistic and non-linguistic representations. So it's going to work a lot better if you have some pictures to go along with the words you're teaching. Sometimes working with some videos you can download, etc. So if you're teaching about hurricanes, volcanoes, tornadoes, it's going to be much more effective to have that language available in a picture form in terms of helping students retain those new vocabulary words. Another thing his research found was it's helpful to teach and use word parts. So again, look at those root words. Teach some of those parts that they may then use in different ways. That's again where that nifty thrifty 50 builds in some of those prefix and suffix. So they start learning that when the prefix RE comes before something, it means something about doing it again. So those types of word parts, so that they have those clues as they go into new words they're trying to figure out the meaning. Another part of his research talked about just different types of instruction of different types of words and how to acknowledge that and teach that for your students. And then students need to be interacting with the words they're learning. They're learning a vocabulary word, again, that rich context of having it in the books they're reading, etc. Games are also effective. And then focus on terms important academic subjects. So those would be some of those Tier 2 words that Isabel Beck talked about. So think about, it's good to know what is that content area in the classroom so that you can build in that vocabulary knowledge when you're working with your students. So again, intervening with that knowledge of text structures. We want to talk about teaching comprehension strategies. Teaching comprehension strategies help students gain knowledge of text structures. Understanding the demands of different kinds of text can help students in accessing and comprehending written materials. For example, narrative is different text structure than expository text or poetry. So it may take explicit instruction to help students access meaning from one genre to another. Copenhaver and Erickson provide 6 general principles for helping students build knowledge of text structures for better comprehension of text. And these are that good readers are active and purposeful in their attempts to understand what they read. This is something teachers can model as they're reading with students. You know, I wonder what's going to happen. I'm going to stop and think about what's happening. I wonder what's going to happen next. And so they're showing how good readers are involved in asking questions as they read. And that's what number 2 is, teaching students to generate their own questions. So teaching students to say, I wonder what will happen next. Or those questions, that self-questioning as they're reading helps build that knowledge of text structure and for comprehension. Another technique is to use visualization or forming mental images while reading. And this helps readers remember specific sentences and paragraphs, but also has a positive effect on that whole passage comprehension. So again, teaching students to stop every now and then and make a picture. And again, this is something else teachers can model, that I'm going to stop and ask myself a question, or I'm engaging, I'm going to review every now and then what I've read, or that visualization, make a picture in your mind when you have a description of the scenery or the character, etc., so that builds on that ability to comprehend text. Teach comprehension strategies. Teaching students how to summarize has a positive effect on comprehension of main ideas, memory of sentences and paragraphs, as well as the integrative of ideas presented in the text, integration of ideas in the text. Students need teachers to model how to interact with text also, including summarizing, comparing and contrasting, and making inferences. And I can't say enough how important it is to actually model and teach that. We often use comprehension questions as a way of testing comprehension, but don't spend a lot of time teaching actual strategies. So again, while reading with students, modeling that ability to summarize now and then, to make inferences and to compare and contrast is so important for students to develop those skills. And for our students who are not readers, they can do that with stories or orally. We can be teaching those skills ahead of time for students who are not good readers, because those are such good, important, rich cognitive skills to have. And again, with students who have more limited skills, maybe it's as much as making an inference or predicting what the weather's going to be tomorrow, or it's summarizing what you had for lunch. I mean, so there's a lot of ways of building those skills in at a real range of levels of students. Developing students' knowledge of text structures can begin in that shared reading of context long before the students can read independently. That's kind of what I'm just saying. So building some of these skills in orally before students can read prepares them for that skill and that cognitive idea when they're actually reading in text themselves. Here are some more language comprehension strategies to build into your guided reading lessons. And these are recommended by Karen Erickson. And so she suggests that first of all, you build or activate background knowledge. Remember we talked about the need to tie that new to the old, new knowledge is the ones we already have. And that's what we do here. Before we're even starting to read the lesson, build or activate that background knowledge based on what's going to be presented in the text that will be read as a group. The second thing to do is set a purpose for reading. And you can provide many opportunities to reread the same text by providing a different purpose each time. So perhaps you could read to find out something specific. You could tell them to read to see what happens to one of the characters. Read to find out ways you're similar or different from one of the characters. So again, each time that story is read with a different purpose, you provide the opportunity to reread and have extra practice with the words, as well as that ability to become more fluent, etc. The third task is to actually read or listen to the text. Spend that time now with the task at hand, having already built the background knowledge, built the purpose in. And then once that story or passage is finished, complete the task. This might be the task that you gave them the purpose, finish that. Maybe it's going to be to write something about the text you just read. And maybe it's to draw a picture, but some kind of a task that comes after that lesson. And then provide feedback. Often teachers provide feedback in the way of like, you did a good job. That's not specific enough. It's much more important to provide some more helpful feedback in terms of, I like the way you read that page, or you read that sentence, you found that word you didn't know and you figured it out. You know, some kind of feedback that would help them know exactly what it was they were doing that was effective for them as readers. So some more comprehension strategies are listed here. So again, over and over you see some of the same things. The importance of connecting to background knowledge, the pre-teaching of vocabulary words. Again, you pre-teach it, but then you provide the task so it's embedded. The teaching of students to predict, to compare and contrast, and to summarize, and to provide a wide range of independent reading texts. Sometimes a challenge for teachers, for students at lower levels, but that in being able to spend a lot of time reading at your independent level is so important. And the other thing is that high-quality content area instruction. We talked about the need to build background knowledge, and so for our students who can't read the grade level text, it's really important that we help build that content in science, social studies, health, etc., so that they have that background knowledge. So again, here's this sheet that Karen Erickson developed, and we're going to look this time at what she says about language comprehension strategies. And this is for when language comprehension is the lowest in the profile when you did the listening comprehension task. So again, for the language comprehension group, she provides a description of the level, the intervention focus, and some example materials. So the orange level is for students at that primer level or lower. Green is for first or second grade, and red for students at that third to fourth grade in language comprehension skills. And then blue for those students whose scores is at the fifth grade level or higher. Remember Taniqua, whose scores we reviewed earlier, would be a student for whom this blue level would be important, and she had all tied scores indicating language involved, and her score in language was at the fifth grade level. So for that student, we look at blue. So that's an example of how you can be looking up for your individual students based on the scores they receive. So just to look at one of these areas to see what information is provided. Again, we're looking at the orange level for the listening comprehension or listening comprehension, language comprehension, and when it's at the primer level or lower. And so the suggested intervention focus for these types of students is to teach students to make connections while reading and or listening to text. Focus on early text-to-self and text-to-world type connections. Maximize interactions while reading the text, and use a variety of listening, echo reading, choral reading, and silent reading formats. An example of a resource that could be helpful at this level is the Start to Finish Literary Series, and these are a series of books that come from the Don Johnston Company. So again, from the resource that Barb Wallach has developed are some other sites that you can find to support vocabulary development. So here's a few listed on this slide and the slide that comes after it from Barb's site. Here are some more of those that you might want to check out and see if these would work well with your students. Here's some sites she provides for videos and to help build that activation of background knowledge we were talking about. So here you see it's several options, and the next screen as well. Some more things that you can use to help download and have your students view ahead of time in order to build that background experience with some pictures, sounds, etc.